Location your system of directions, readjusting, remembering, resurfacing, re-angling, repoint lines of graph, communicates to its cycle, line condition existing, liken it to its atmospheres, its awakening to its awareness, location to its mind operation system into all set travels, K ultra line, screen adaptation and flux, the process are set track locations. The reason why we can't convert to itself because we're still in a dream. What does that dream mean? Am I dreaming right now? Do I know, understand that what that means in that positions? As I look at myself in that positions, am I creating fantasies of myself that just keeps running the system? Well, there's nothing running the system if you already are existing in the setting, but you're not in the process of the dream. You've never been dreaming. Now you have to get out of the escape of the dream itself. Understand that interpretation system is let go everything that you're not of equalizations. And that's what kept you in the dream, is being everything of equal. Applying tables, addition, multiplication lines that add, subtract, or divide. Divide line sequence equals triangulation, separation, split, lines of anomaly of zero gravity. Okay? So this equals this, separation, right? So this core lines of settings of flux line, 3 centers of travel, direct lines of positional levels. That indicates position of yin and yang, okay? Process in position of 8 lines, rotation lines of sequence, okay? The 8 ball. Everybody knows what an 8 ball is, right? Through pool. So 8 is the favorite number that process lines of anything of number and set lines of travels. So you got 4 lines of 8, indicates settings, position of 4 centers of sequence and triangulation line, course centers, direct line, course centers, and Merkabah tesseract and tetrahedron. The roots, the routers, course centers, calculation, setting, and travel. So what you have to understand, if you set an equal sign, it separates. Every time you separate, you're separating what's above and you're separating what's below. Holographic sim, matrix sim. So there's no conversion system in travels until you understand your embedding system location of balance. Once you understand, you get out of the embedding system of you process your individual system, how you see the percentage, how you see the equal in that direction, okay? So that's what indicates everything in settings, and that process lines are 1 times 1. That's process, that calculations, green locations. Your formula equations, all right? So everything you come into an addition, let's get +1 + 1 equals, let's get position location 1 times 1. Everything you see the equal sign separates the equation of the polarities, all right? So that's what it is. So split lines anomalies of 1, 2 panels. That's 1 is split in 2. That's separation because you have the equal sign. But if you change the equal to box, square root, and 3 lines settings, it process indication to its system comes embedded in locates to its systems all through balance. Okay, so it's very powerful how we come into that. Understand the polarities and set lines of sequence and location stating what's above and what's below in set position, right? So this is the embedding through individual system. This is the platforms of travel and set lines of travel communication. This is a location grid that puts you in positions of balance. This is what puts you in the polarities, opposite directions into line condition, positive and negative, that creates a portals of a Stargate that puts you in the process of communication lines of travels into Merkabah, tesseract, and tetrahedron travel. Okay, so it simplifies how you put in that position. So try to understand that in lines of communications. Now we come into the E equals MC square. All right, MC square, right? Now, where's the separation? Equal sign. What does it separate? MC square. So it separates the position of M, past, present, and its future, just in mind alteration. It separates the C in communication lines, division location, dimensional sail, and it separates the box frame location setting in 3 lines of 4, set position of 7, set lines of 12, set lines of 24, lines of sequence. Negative over lines of 12, negative over lines of 12, negative lines of 12, and negative lines of 12. Living line position, its operation setting, but it's void in travel. Okay, so it's the opposite of everything, right? So that's what embedded means. Okay, embedded is process and position where you come into separations, but you're calculating modify. You guys were living this. Okay, see the intelligence coming in? Triangulation here, triangulation here. So what we're doing? Coming to a unity, coming into triality. Trial line rotation lines connecting to trilogies, location setting, and track line communicates the position of its convergence into its Merkabah, tesseract, and its tetrahedron. Process and position, solar generation lines, process calculation line, direct location to its cycle. cross line angles, XT thousands above, XT thousands below, set lines of travel communications. Set operation line sequence, downshift lines of anomaly, rotation lines of location, travels point lines of graph, ear indicates lines of setting to Earth, ear resist lines of space and travel, and that correlations. Directing lines of flux, 3 lines of measure, 3 lines of scale, 3 lines of balance into position, location, and setting. Intelligent subface recognition. Okay? So everything that I do in its equation is all lines adaptations of force. Now you see dream, okay, equals everything, okay? So you separate it. This is separation. That's what you guys have been living. You've been separating the D's over R's, the E's, the A's, and M. You're processing in position. You separated your past, your present, and your future. But when you get in your own individual system, you embedded everything of your own setting. Then you get into your graphing screens in position of balance of travel. So that's put you into solid matter, how you see yourself out of carbon, which is out of 12, position silicone, which is 24. So you can stay in silicone, but don't go into position of the body of frequency where you are, especially when you come into 644 at set lines of setting, because it offlines your position, location, measure, scale, that confusion lines your anomalies where you are in your polarities. So flux over screen, flux over lines, net lines of core centers, 0 line, 1 rotation lines, ground center, calculated modified directing line, communication with convergent system all through travel. Calculated line screens, step to system all through settings. Your process of communication setting is processed in directions, coming in 0, 1s, and tractions. Activators are coming in 0, 0. So it has a 0 calculation line screen adaptations. There's no separation of 0, 0. 0, 0 is 1. 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1 is 1, right? That's direct and redirect. Direct and redirect is 1, right? Dream is not separated. So if dream's not separated, you're not separated. You never were separated because you've always been already existing in position. How can you be in position of anything line settings in process of location setting? Because you never were in a dream in the first place because you've always been existing. The dream is what takes you over. The dream that keeps you separated in your set positions. The dream that keeps you in the modification setting, that keeps you into position. So any setting force regulated timelines or back force line corresponds to calculation to its vacuum, directing going forward or directing going back. But direct and redirect is always one unification setting. Your polarities are one unification. Now you see your dualities, your dichotomies, or antilocations to your systems. Processing in that position location, you're in one unity in set lines of travel. How you see everything above, it's how you see everything below, is one unity of one flux, of one continuous flow of yin and yang. And to process that, it's awareness to its consciousness. Communicating that line screen adaptation is consciously being aware. So your compute system understand the correlation lines of time and frame location that you see through space lines and on location to its time and set location that puts you in all levels into the existing all levels, and that lines that communicates to position location in your system and sees you in position of balance, what you're doing through your dream. But you have to get at the dream that never existed of the dream itself. That's the only way you can modify yourself, how you see yourself light and how you see yourself dark. There's no light, there's no dark. You live in light and dark. And that's what you have to get into termination system. So let's get a business lines of offline setting and sequence, okay? I'm living the light. Just the light. Walking around, light, right? But where's the dark? If I don't have the dark, I don't see everybody else in light, shades, and shadows. You understand? So you don't see volume, you don't see mass. You're only seeing a 3-dimensional scale, or you're seeing a 2-dimensional, 1-dimensional, or a 0 scale. Anything below that, you're just coming into dark itself. That separates. So you live in the dark over the light. Light signal lines, 9 line settings, 9 sequence, process lines of 90 over times frequency, triangle link line communication percentage over pi, and direct lines of core centers, solar sails. So that's 90% dark, and line condition setting override line sequence and light. Light over dark, dark over light, travel communication. So we have to get into codification setting more than ever now. We have to balance our polarities and understand how to interpret the position of levels of escape. And this is all done through time sequence, time correlations, time calculation, times pi. Now you have your keyboards. Now you use your keyboards line condition setting to ESC. Now ESC equals, but you understand what the equal is. So C as the equal as a embedded setting. Don't see the separation. Use it as a platform of transition, of travel. Use it as a portal, a set position of security lines of communication. Now you can continue. So the escape, okay, is the existing to the systematical of change, calculation, confirmation, or communication. Directing ground centers on line centers. Pi generates lines of 4 lines of settings. Set course centers of 3 over lines, 4 over tractions, 3 line divisions, 4 over lines of sequence. Balance out communication of direct and redirect and set lines of symbolism that cross the angles of 4 lines of setting and sequence. Sets course centers and direct lines of grounds and high C crop circles and sent lines of travel and 4 communication surface and travel. So the escape is basically keeping you in upline settings, upright lines, course center calculated screen locations. So every time you see an equal sign, how are you seeing it through light? How are you seeing it through dark? Okay, so let's change the position of time frame. Let's coordinate communication setting, line communication setting. Let's separate position locations. So what if you get a full 8? That's a full 8, right? What is a half 8? Does anybody know what a half 8 is? Question. And that's what you're living on. Question of everything. There's nothing to question if it's a quantum self-location. There's always infinity rotation. Your balance communication above and position lines of below is all screen lines adaptations of yin and yang. See, there's the 8. 8 line centers, a percentage, and set lines of travel. 100% line course centers of the mind imagination lines of recourse communication setting, and 1,000 line square roots is triangulation. So it's amazing how we don't see anything of separation. Okay, that's why you guys, when you're in that settings, living in cycles as a baby, child, teenager, adult, that's 4 settings sequence, right? You guys were living equal lines of everything. That's where it comes 1 times 1 equals, right? So the equal separates everything, separates the yes, separates the no. So there's no balance. That's what you guys are living. So that's putting you in the dream of top. That's putting you in the dream of panels. That's putting you in the dream of grounds, and that's putting you in the dream of the atmospheres. Locking you in a triangulation box, matrix. So that's all it is, basically. It's just trying to understand how to keep yourself embedded with each other in that setting. You're doing it individual. So your line communication setting. So you're in the connection setting, and you're in the position location, how you see yourself in your metabed, and that line's a division, and nobody's in that line's a setting. That process of communication, how you see yourself in all lines of course centers like calculations. If you get a box frame, okay, you have above line signal, you got 2 panels of operation, and you got south wind lines of sectors over line, right? Indicate 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of pi, right? So in position lines of setting, box frame, triangulation, and set travel, okay? So there's no separation. So the actual pyramids, when you see, you only see this. That's the separation. Okay? But everything below is just the mirage, is the light, shades, and shadows. Everything has to have light, shades, and shadows. So you don't live in light, you don't live in dark. You live in light and dark at the same time. And when you live light and dark at the same time, you're seeing the rainbows. You're seeing the mirage. You're seeing the void. You're seeing the shades and the shadows in set position. Everything with a pyramid has to have light, shades, and shadows. Okay? So you can't just live the light, you have to live the dark. But you live in light and dark at the same time, so there is no separation. You come into that position location of nothing in that setting. So there's no yes, and there is no no of separation, right? Yes and no is together of yin and yang. There's the percentage of where you are in your mind of collaboration of balance. What percentage are you in position? Are you in 67 line settings? That cross lines of 3 over lines is 70. Cross lines of times 3. 100% line centers, 1,000 scale, 1,000 measure, 1 million frame per second. Okay? So everything I say is not separated of anything because they live in a holographic system of setting. Okay? Is how everything's done, and how everything's done through its setting of its position location of 4 centers of travel, 6 lines of measure, highways of interference, directing lines of polarities, cross lines of indications, travels to point lines of graph, calculate and modify, limit communication what's above, living what's position line to below, course centers and direct lines of center, operation embedding, and rotation lines of grounds, on sequence, on communication, on pi. Okay, so everything I say is never separated of anything because I'm living polarities at the same time of figure 8. Figure 8. Figure 8, figure 8, figure 8. There's the fly. There's the position. Okay? That propels the surfacing engine that correlates the communication setting to Earth rotation setting that creates this fading E8. So Routes the routers, course centers, calculations, screen lines, adaptation of travels. But you understand why everything has to have lights, shades, and shadows in its directions of those locations. All right? Because without light and dark, you're dreaming. And that's what you guys created through anomaly. Right? So you have to have light, shades, and shadows in the directions of the sun that puts position, location, measure, and scale of communication going in that direction. Right? Then you go in this lines and settings. Okay, so you go in the opposite locations, right? So there is an opposite, okay, to an action, to a verb, now to an adjective or location setting, how you process that positions in your alphabetical system, lines of travel. One goes one way, one goes the other way. But their polarities of together, working with their system, always together in affinity 8. Everything rotates the system. Your body's nothing but a supercharging highway that has aligned screen adaptations. But you're not connected to a line. There's no line, okay? This is a line, just a holographic line. It's an image line screen adaptations, has no course of space, has no course of time until you bring it in through specification system, right? It's just not there, right? And then when you understand where you are, you start to see everything locations come to your images, and you process that through your visional cortex of your theta. Your theta is your imagination of the inner child that sets all position location systems all through tractions. Okay, then you start living the existing. So how can you live in the existing already that you're already existing if you still think you are in a dream? Okay, there's no course of action until you understand what the direction is, what the reline is, what is the existing, what is its awakening of its mind. Understanding there's no equal line because it's all levels embedded. Copy, paste, erase, delete, enabled, location setting, and travel. Okay? Either way, you're in set position, always living the figure 8 of the in position lines of setting in its percentage 100% of the time. That's all it is, yin and yang. How you represent that position is all through light and is all through dark. The sun and moon is always together. Okay? You are never separable. You've never been separable. But what keeps you separated is the equal sign. That's what you guys get very confused of. Equal of everything. You have an argument with each other, and that position lines of settings, okay? You're communicating with each other, lines of its alteration of its egos, okay? Now, how to see that information system is how to route the routers, course settings, calculations, screen locations, and setting. So if you live in the negative cycle, you live in the dark. That overrides light. There's a separation. Okay? Now you're not understanding the percentage of where you are in your mind. There's the polarities. Okay? There's infinity 8. There's the propeller. There's the flywheel, infinity 8. There's the platform. Now you can travel through light and dark at the same time. Okay? Now you can walk the surface at the same time scale at the same position. So you come into levels of just expanding yourself, right? But you've always been living the light and dark at the same time. See? Even though this is separated, it doesn't matter. Nothing's separated. So this is inseparable. This is what you guys have always been. The light and dark together. Light and dark. That's what you've always been living in. So you live in that. What does that create? A dimension of a solar sail. Whoa! Whoa! A solar sail. A dimensional sail. Through light and dark together. That's what you guys have always been. Is inseparable. Through the other soul. So there's no way, in any way, form, that you guys can be dreaming, thinking that you already are in separation. You're separating the light and the dark, right? There's no separation. That's where you are in dimensional solar sail, live in the water of its continuous force, just swimming in set lines of travel. Going in the same direction, just like everybody else. The domino effect. So if you get a box screen, okay, and that position is going 3 lines of centers of travel, okay, and you get another box screen in the low frequency lines of travel, and you get a high screen in a box frame location, high line division location of travel, there's always a connection, all through pi, all through clocking, all through rotation and settings of affinity 8 rotation lines of screen. So everything you calculate and modify through in line position locations, you live light or you live dark. That's your problem. And the problem is codifying because it's not a problem. P is not a problem. P is the processing. R is not the problem. R is the remembering. or readjusting or refocusing. So try to get in a communication setting, not bring in the equal lines of course centers, balance the communication, what you see above and what you see below. And what you see above and what you see below is nothing to be equal. Okay? So what you have to understand how to use the light and the dark at the same time. So 50-50, okay, through light and dark is not balance. 51 over 50, okay, is balance. You can't have an overlying 50-50. You know why? Because the oversoul is not 50-50. Because the oversoul is always in a continuous force. It's always expanding itself. So how can it be at 50 if it's already 100 in position over lines in position 150 over the line? It doesn't make any sense if you think it's at 50-50. That's you in separation of you. That's you separating your light and your dark. So never think of what's going on until you identify what you always have been, never of the dream itself. So it's a constant continuous force that you have to understand through the oversoul. So the oversoul knows exactly where it is through its light and through its dark. It's 150 on light and 100% of dark. That's the balance. Okay? So if you get a position lines of balance in line screen, it's all of the specifications, how you use it through your mind, through the psychosis. And it gets really interesting how you come into the line condition setting to always paraphrasing yourself, knowing exactly how you get into a paradigm. Process lines of force signals of graphs, set lines of travels, operation lines of sequence, set grounds that communicates positions, all through line condition setting of affinity 8 in percentage of where I am in my mind. Okay? Where I am in my mind in that position. So you're creating a crop circle. So yin and yang starts off with the yin, the process of the yang. The yang is the expression. The yang is the connections of its emotion. All right? Expressed in the inner line course, directing lines to the outer course, which is emotional line attractions. That's emotions, factors over line connection immortality to eternal being of light. That process my position locations, how I see light and how I see dark through two panels. But how I see light and dark through two panels is embedding through square root. Embedding 3 lines of travel as the directions of location grid. Process indicates line connections to triangulation lines of box. Indicate box over lines of triangulation lines of flux. Right? Because I don't see separation. You see separation because you think you're living dark that overrides the light. You have to live light and dark at the same time. And now you're seeing the structures of everything that is light, dark, shades, and shadows. If not, you're just chasing your own shadow over and over and over again. So now you have to embrace you, right? You got the ally, okay, and you got the nemesis. So it's in its space of time. You're in its space and time. So you don't want the position taking over your system, travels in point lines graph, taking over your polarities, affinity, line rotation. Because at off position lives the set course centers of time frame that communicates system all through pi and travel. So it's an indication system that you have to formulate and simulate yourself back to yourself. It's you fighting against yourself. And the one thing that you guys separate yourself is you. Because you're already existing, so how can you be separated? How can you be inseparable if you're already existing already? So you had never been light and you've never been dark. It's how you live your light, and it's how you live your dark through solar sail of travel. And that indicates everything location to a constant continuous flow that has an internal to external force that basically has a surfacing engine that operates everything of its mind itself. Recognize that you're always in the lines of communication, that how you see that through directions, the alteration of its egos, how you see the constants that your bodies go in, but you truly understand how to run your system through light, dark, not light and dark. Don't say and because it overrides the dark over light. The process of communication is your light webbing and your dark webbing. Now that process line set is a 90,000 line setting. Okay, that process lines of indication system all to travel. Okay, so you got 9,000 seconds in frame. You got 9 million line rotation line condition setting. That's on the lines of positional loads of 3 line zeros, 2 lines of attractions, and 1 line rotation of pyramid, living in the dark. That's the dark through pi. So we got piece lines of settings, process line directions, inline course centers, calculating, modify, and direct line communication with Merkaba, tesseract, and its tetrahedron, and set lines of travel. Operation line is the operate of everything of the opposite attract. but your process, your position location, just living everything in the lines of dark, not light. Dark overrides the light. Light is no longer indicate lines of light, shades, and shadows. So without light and dark, there's no shadows of massive volume. Through a box, or triangulation, or a star route, or highways and travel, a graph. So there's no separation here. But what you have to identify is that they're all together in set position, in set travel. Okay, so they link to each other through telepathy, all lines of travel. And they calculate and modify how they see themselves in a full affinity 8 and rotation lines of connection, converting with their systems, all through setting of yin and yang. Okay? So getting you guys a basic understanding how to come into light, shades, and shadows is embracing your connections of you, which is the dark realms of you. So there's no good, there's no bad in that until you indicate that. So if you indicate the bad, your body changes and that position morphs into that setting. So you don't live in dark, you don't live in light. You have to live in light and dark. Now you can live dark over light, light over dark, that's totally fine, but you have to understand how to codify that. And that's through addition, multiplication, and line condition setting to allows in dividing and subtracting and ratios and proportions, how you start seeing your life, right? How do you want to see your life? Do you see your life through 1/3 lines of pi? Or do you see a split lines of 3 lines of pi? Or do you see 4 lines of communication lines of pi? Or do you see clocking lines of 0 lines of pi and 1 indicating position of flux over pi? How do you see your life? Well, it's not about how seeing your life, it's identifying that your life is already existing. So if life has always been existing, you have to get into the true formations of the body. Okay? That's always existing in its platform. Okay? So the soul needs its body, okay? Because the body has to understand the dream that it's in. It's the body that's dreaming, not the oversoul. And the oversoul has that in position where it comes in its transformation system, transference, transcendence, and it's all levels of its transformation system. Once the oversoul, and that's where it comes into position locations, building the arc, okay, that lines you understand that your body's a geometric operation design, the soul will come to you through time frame, okay? So it's the soul sees it, the body as a vessel. And if it doesn't see the body as a vessel, it's still caught in a dream. So the body and the soul can't evolve together in a unification, a percentage, and how you see the percentage of your systems all through volume and mass of yin and yang. That is the percentage. Okay, so how you see that lines of escape is how you see that lines of screen. Now, when you come in the time frame, you start to use correlation, communication, position lines of commute operation lines, set lines of T over force. That's travels lines, equals lines of force line, course centers, C factors. Factor over lines of centers, screen adaptation of flux, process lines indicates the setting, all travel. So that's why I want you guys to really start logging into space more and more at a higher line division. Especially when you come in throw patterns at 644, the activators are coming at 544. And everybody else is going to be at 344. Okay, the ones that are non-activated, non-binary. So that's negative line cycles over lines of positive. That's an overdraft. So the soul doesn't need to understand that. It's the body has to understand that. Okay, because its soul is not dreaming. It's the body that's dreaming through the soul. The soul never dreams. So what you have to start indicating of in that position location is that you have to come together through collaboration and partnership through one polarities and set lines of travel of what's above and what's below. Okay, is a holographic sim and the matrix sim that work together. How you see that in box, how you see that in triangulation, right? That's the opposite to the box. But everything's going to be the opposite because it's the equal line centers of separation. So it's the bad of everything, guys. But don't think it's bad. Just identify its polarities of balance, okay, to its platforms and how you go with that through equilibrium and how to go through that platforms in set position, okay, and traction, and how you come into location of grids of going forward and securing lines of communication, right? So, and then you understand how you indicate these things all through flux, and you realize what a pyramid is. There's expanding, but it always goes through its lights, shades, and shadows. Okay, because there's always volume and mass of everything that you draw. It has to come in its volume. It has to come in its mass. And so identify how you see that in line's position. Okay, and where the light is indicating from. Where is the light coming from in set position? Okay, where is the light coming from? Okay, so once you understand that, it just gets a lot more easier how you see the connections of the space itself, okay, which is the void itself, which is the mass, volume, velocity, acceleration, and Mach. Now you can set lines of all sequence lines. You can have all line centers, all that communications, all lines, all position, all black, right? But it needs its shadow. It needs its light, and it needs its shades to its system to an amplification setting. Cross lines of 4 lines of sequence. Now it's got a full line position of void itself that processes its emotional system. The interconnection setting, how we process the drawings, is all levels of expression. You're expressing yourself, but the void itself is you through all levels in your emotion. How you emotion your settings and travels, then you come in position locations, your light, shades, and shadows. Okay, now bring that into gray. Okay, it's in gray. Now you can bring it into color if you want, right? But you have to understand, you live in light and dark in set position all at once. And how it sees frames, it comes in colorations of pattern recognition. Okay, that's the mass, that's the volume, how you see things in space and time, right? Configuring line conditions of pattern recognition, of face recognition, of force recognition, of time frame is processing your system all through travel. Okay, so everything you say negative brings you into the lower sequence in position of percentage and setting. So 100 lines, that's equal lines centers, travel point lines graph. Negative over lines of 0, negative over lines of 0, negative lines of 0. So that's 3 lines of settings and set lines of travel. Live in the back force of the opposite of everything the line communicates to its position of energetic flow pattern. So that's the opposite that you live on everything line condition setting. So there's no sustainable in location of travel. Okay, until you understand this is the sustainable location setting and direct and redirect at set position of operation. Then you understand the location grids of what you're doing in travel through Schumann resonance. Setting line alpha wave, delta, theta, omega, zeta, zeta, gamma, right? But your process and position, how you're seeing the communications of what's above and what's below at the same time. That indicates light and that indicates dark and balance. So when you put light and dark together, all you're creating is a wind sail. You're creating an oscillator. You're creating a wind path. You're creating a dimensional sail, a solar sail, okay, through light and through dark. And sometimes it gets smaller and sometimes it gets bigger. Okay? So as it gets bigger, it's expanding your longitudes and it's expanding your latitudes in set lines of travel. Okay? So once you get into that, you get into all levels and set position. This operates your settings and travels. Okay, so we got 17 scale. Let's equalize the setting. There's the separation equals square. Okay, 17 set core centers, split lines of anomaly, dimensional sail. Right? So that becomes a box. That overlines the online communication setting of light and dark and set lines of sequence. Sets core centers, polarities, affinity rotation, travels of point lines of graph. Directing ground centers communicate to high sim locations of face recognition. There's the face. So light and dark creates the face. Light and dark creates the dimensional and the solar sail. So once you understand the pattern recognition and face recognition of configuration, then you get into position locations of your light languages. And when you understand that, you understand how to codify that and being specific. You've got to be specific of what you're doing with your voice now because you're reaching high levels, your binaries that you have to understand. Okay? So there's no equal of anything of separation. Okay? Because if you equal yourself, you're separating yourself from light and dark. If you separate your light and dark, you're separating yourself in space and time. If you're separating your space and time, you're separating the sun and the moon in set lines of travel. So everything separates. So now you live in the opposite of everything, which is just the void. Void itself. Okay? So it's just a true understanding how do you modify these things, how you draw these things out. There's no separation because you've always been of who you are. It's just existing. So what you in that lines, let's get into escape. Okay, that equal lines of course centers of travel, direct lines of grounds. Set lines of north, east, west, and south. Okay, turn position lines setting equal lines into aligned course centers and position a Merkaba to a sail. That indicates position going forward. Line settings of escape equals lines, Control Alt. Then you can press F1. That resets your setting, or you can go up to F6 or F9 or F12. Okay, so that modifies the truth and false narrative. Okay, 1, 3. Okay, 5, 7. Odd numbers. Okay, 2, 4, 6 are even numbers. Okay, so that identifies F1 is line centers of negative over void, cross lines of position over line settings. So that's not A, B negative, that's B, A negative. So that's what you guys have to understand. How to indicate that position location in travel. Once you stand Control and Alt, F1, process lines are reset. It's no difference when you come to error and screen adaptations, process lines, and 404. Okay, doesn't indicate your position, your AI, doesn't identify are you identification of your own system or your own coding. So there's no identification system, right? So retracking that setting location to a system all through operation, right? So there's no indication, right? Return to sender, all right? So if it returns to center, that's the negative. Going forward is the positive. But the process of the polarity is affinity rotation, that you see things above and you see things below, but not through separation. You separate your mind, you're separating your additions, you're subtracting, your dividings, and your multiplications, right? Now adding and multiplication, is it the same? No, it's different. You think adding, see, that's where you're very confused in your minds. You think this is where it comes in synonym and homonym, something similar to the same. Adding, okay, and multiplication. Okay, multiplication is times, but adding is also times. See, you got to come into your own individual system, how you see light and dark of your own position, is to get out of the dream of everything that you're embedded in, which is everyone else. So come into your mind imagination, addition and multiplication is the same, right? Just because you're adding plus and times doesn't mean it's not the same. I say it is, because I indicate what it is through light and how I see it through dark, or how I see it through dark and how I see it through light. It doesn't matter because it's all together in set position of a polarity of 8. So there's no off of anything. It's all individual system of travel, right? That's where it comes into something similar, right? Something setting offline. You think yes and no are indicative of separation. No, yes is how I see yes. Yes is how I see unification. And set lines of just you. N is the now, which is the process of line condition of its network. But it's not separated inside the mind. It's all levels of its polarities of yin yang. So that's the communication where it comes in this position of its embedding system, infinity 8. Now I can travel through yin and yang of this process of walking this system or flying or levitating. And set lines of travel. So I'm trying to get you guys to identify how to come into the solar sails of light and dark together. It's that travel. Okay? It's very powerful. It's very interesting. And it's very connected to your system as you understand it through a Schumann graph or line condition setting, box graph, scene graph, course center, modified vision graph, theta graph, communication convergence, system of travel. But all you're indicating you is you're never separable if you're already existing already. So there's no way you can be light and dark. You're always light and dark at the same time, which means you're not in lines of position. You're all in your own individual system. You never embedded each other. That is the dream you need to get out of in sequence, because it's the directions, the remembering, the existing, the awakening, the awareness of its mind and where I am in the embedding system, all through individual systems, all in track lines of expanding. That's the expansion. And how you see that is information setting through portals and stargates and travel. Okay? So you just have a lot of fun with that. And then your drawings get much easier and your mind gets much easier. You adapt a lot more faster. You know, you come into line center location with settings all through travel and then communication positions. So you get a higher level of set position of the mind of imagination. And you start to ask these things, and then you get out of lines of everything of a question of this or anything of a question of this. It's in lines of travel. Okay? Yes, this is above. Yes, this is below. Right? but they're always in sync with each other and infinity-8 rotation. So there is no disarray or anything of communications. You're working with infinity-8 and rotation lines of line centers of light and dark at the same time in a circular motion that puts you internal external force all together in travel. That's all this is. And what do we come in positions? Face recognition. There's the face. Okay, there's the oversoul in real time existing already. Now it's just coming into its evolving system. It doesn't need to understand its dream because it knows it's whenever it's in a dream in the first place, but it understands the instructions and how to play the game of what it is to its sim. You have a holographic sim and you have a negative sim. It's understanding you through positive and it's understanding you through negative. Positive, negative, not positive and negative. Because the ANG, okay, sets an anagram to its networks of its direction. And now you live in the directions off lines of your networks at line core centers, so you have your locations. Now you live in the derivative locations and transition locations to all lines of solar sail. That's going back in time, which is the opposite of everything, of travel. I understand now. So be very careful how you indicate your binaries and how you say things to yourself and each other through indications of your alphabetical sitting or anything attractions is that position. Okay? You follow your own instincts. And that follows you in positions out of the equations that you are no longer in a dream that never existed and set position its operation. Okay? It's incredible stuff. It really is. You know, how you see it in affirmation setting. So once you understand the interpretation of the dream, then you understand how to balance at the ally of you and the nemesis of you. It's a force of recognition of balance. And it's all lines of communication of data files that you have to come in position of because you're reaching higher levels is your doppelgangers now. And when you get across stream location setting, you're going to see older versions of your system, which is the old lines, levels lines of directions you got to let go. Right? Now, when I say old, that doesn't mean old. Okay? So what does it mean to me? That process me how I see light and dark at the same time, how I see dark and light, how I see yes and no, or maybe. Okay? It all defies how you are already existing already in that position, living the intelligence of forever, always, always, always existing. It's that travel. Okay? So we all have to identify that lines of screen that puts every location system off the calculations. All right? So this is going to help you identify how you see yourself of everything outlined setting now, because the connections of the operators and units are going to be outer space now, living the outer norm. They're going to be living the outer spectrum, okay? They're going to be living the outer lines of cycle, okay? So how you live Earth 2.0, okay? Provisions, lines of descent, lines of 3, centers, 4 centers of travel, direct lines of link, process of communication lines of betting, in lines of direct location system, and travel calculation. Okay, so living the outside of pi from the inner core centers, so it's direct line communication. So they're living the emotions now, as humanity is living the expressions. They have to get into the expressions first, then they come into the emotions and settings. But the team now in units is living the outer space spectrum as of Friday and set lines of 644 and throw pattern, which is pattern recognition through configuration, setting, and travel. Okay, living the outside of its emotion and understand how to balance out the light and dark of its system all through pi. The process of indicating line conditions of humanity is going to be living line condition expression to understand the intercourse, the balance of communication of the polarities of light and dark in position locations getting out of the dream of its existing. That process everything locations how they see their force in direction of time frame and locates to its setting through operation. Okay? Once they come into that positions, they automatically come into the balance, okay, in 144 line rotations and its polarities, course centers, direct and ground centers, a sequence, all communication with systems, all through pi. Okay? So that's what we're indicating in line settings. Processing, what does that mean to you as you get out of the dream, right? So there's so many ways, like I said, is how you see separation, right? That's what you're seeing. You're seeing separation of the sun, you're seeing separation of the moon, you're seeing separated. Just because I'm here and you're over here doesn't mean we're separated. If I'm here looking at you and you're 2 feet away or 4 feet away or 6 feet away, you think there's a separation. There's no separation. That's off you position. So now you're living just the dark of the dark, no light. So that's negative over negative. You don't want to do that. Okay, so that's two provision lines of cycles. Polarity is going into the reverse of set lines of travel. Line communication in the opposite direct location setting in lines of polarities that you don't want to visit locations. Now you're in positional levels of dogma, not dharma. Okay, so everything you're looking at in that position location is already inside of you. You're already always in the center of operation that never leaves the system. You just have to understand you're expanding outside line condition setting, how you see the light and how you see the dark. So there is no separation how you see these things. It doesn't matter how you set the setting. It doesn't matter how you set the operation. It doesn't matter how you see each other in that position. You're never separable. You always, always, always have lived light and dark through the holographic sim, and you live light and dark in that position lines of settings, process that position, light and dark of past, present, and future in the holographic sim, light and dark in line position locations. Now, what you have to start in line screen adaptations is understanding the dark over light and light over dark. Once you understand that position line condition setting, the levels that communicate to its polarities, process, dimension, solar sail. Okay? Holographic sim lives locations to its position. Same with the track course centers in all levels of the matrix sim. All right? Process in that position location, there is no separation in interactions. What you have to identify, they're embedded each other in set position of square root. The process line position is above, set lines of sequence, process lines of downshift, lines of anomaly. There's your structure, there's your building, there's your pyramid and set travel. Process indication setting, you're working with light and dark, setting a pyramid activation line with ridges and rudders, course centered calculation line constellation setting as projection. Set course centered to your pyramid. Directing line course centered, 0, 1s of travel. Lines of communication set position road graph in the mapping system. Process indication line 0, 0, 0. And that process line 0, 1. So you're setting up your inventories and positioning your story frame. That process your indicating lines where your oversoul is everything done already through its eternity and location and set tractions. That's just 0s and 1s. So there's always ways to see this in provision, all through calculation setting to your polarities. Okay, infinity cycles. So this is going to help you out understanding how to come into your line position on all levels, how you don't say anything of and because you're separating light and dark now. So always say position locations, I'm connecting light, dark. So I'm connecting light and I'm connecting to dark. I'm connecting light and I'm connecting to dark. There's the expansion. I'm connecting light and I'm connecting to dark. There's the expansion. So all you're creating is platforms of frequencies. And it's platforms that puts all communication setting, how you see the roots, routers, course centers of your planes. Existing on no planes, existing all planes all at once. And platforms of communications has no existence until you bring it in through specification. All right. Once you bring it in specification, then you go to location grid. Set lines of platforms, you go into another location grid. But your process and position, you're always going through light and dark at the same time in position how you see a holographic sim and the matrix sim at the same time. Okay? So that's what you have to stand directions of. Okay? So as you go in this position, that's above, right? But you need below. Okay? Turn the setting. There's your Merkaba. Okay? There's your travel. There's your directions. There's your crop circle. Okay? And then you can expand your Merkaba in higher frequency lines of grounds. Now you come into a higher line setting. Now it's your next 1000. So there's so many ways to see this in platform, guys. And it's very powerful when you let everything go that you're not, which is the story of the dream that you have to let go. Because it offlines your positions of where you are in travel. And it communicates your anomalies if you're not understanding what you always are in. Is a holographic sim and the matrix sim at the same polarity, at the same time, and the same clocking of its convergent system that puts an internal force, location, a percentage of where you are in your mind conceptual setting of yin yang. Not yin and yang, yin yang. So it's not this. Okay? Nothing is separated because you're separating your mind imagination. So it's yin, not this, and set lines. Yin yang, no. Okay? So this is really interesting to come in that position. So how you see the yin is how you see the yang through light and dark, which is light, shades, and shadows come together in that communication of convergent system. So that points lines of graph, directing the ground centers, process lines of indication setting, all through setting. Okay? Process indication line condition setting to its position location of system. Yin yang. Bring it together. There's your pyramid. Booyah! So you all come together in balance. Now you're creating the pyramid. Now you're creating the grounds. Now you're creating the panels. Now you created the ceiling. Now you're in the simulation of the sim. And that position lines and settings, all through track location to its system, all through its operations, calculate, and modify. That's real time and existing and everything happening all at once. Boo-yah. And that's all through yin yang, not yin and yang. So don't ever think you're separate in your mind imaginations. That keeps you on a constant, continuous force that what you have to modify is that you're always, always existing through yin yang of the polarities, how you see things above or how you see things below. There's no above and there's no below because you're already, always, always in the center operation of your system that never leaves the system, which is your I itself. Okay? Booyah. All right? So hopefully that identifies you, more levels of light and dark, how you formulate and simulate yourself in that lines of travel. Okay? But that's what you're coming in position of. Once you stand the position of the grounds, the powers, the atmospheres, the line centers, then you stand position location in your system, then you understand how to coordinate communication levels across your core centers and lines of thoughts, action, emotions, then you come into position location, how to create it through line position location of systems, all the holographic gridding of grounds, 2 panels operation lines, setting lines the sequence of its ceiling. Now you got a simulator. Live in the system of yin yang. And that process, your position locations, when you come into your line settings and travel. Okay? It's amazing when you come into that. What do you come in position next? You come into line centers, how you see the pyramid in line position locations of light, shades, and shadows. Lights, shades, and shadows. A balance of light and dark at the same time. Right? All right, so it has a direct line link. Sun is over here. In directing lines at 3 lines of angles and travel. Okay, that's crossing angle, right? So you have the sun moving over here. It's that position. This is what you can do in the sim. So you can have light in both directions. You can have light and dark in both directions. That's where your oversoul has a direct line link that processes its shadow. So you can have a set position here. Okay, this is you anomalies. It's just space itself, which is the void itself. And set position location operates line connection. And the position location converts position location to travel. That's you, right? But this also can be a version of you, like this. Okay, and this can be another version of you, like this. Okay, so this is light and dark at the same time. Okay, and then you come into your own rainbow of your own system, identifying your settings, location your setting. Okay, so yeah, it's really interesting coming to that. Let's get into gold. Oh, right, higher self. Right, so that overrides line centers. Now you live in the higher self. In real time, staying with the Schumann resonance, not going above. Anything above is the avatar. Okay? So that overrides everything else, and you just live the higher self. Now, the higher self, lines between dilatation and flux, process communication lines of 13 angles, parallel endpoint lines of graph. But it's amazing how we come in that location setting a full configuration system. So the sound barriers change time from frame, line connection, to pattern direction of timelines, the process core centers to calculate the line, position, location, or cycle. Process that indicate lines, voice pattern comes in, lines of travel, in that position. Okay? Sets out lines of zeros and ones in your system and travel. Okay? So it modifies line connects to the binary core centers, directing lines of link, networks over lines of 4 lines of flux over screen. Binaries coming in position of green all at once, and line connects with grounds, powers, and atmosphere location setting to your higher self. Setting lines of travel, direct lines of link, line communication, position location, convergence location, lines of position location, line connection to 000. Set lines of 3 lines of 001. Sets lines of cycles, interference lines of travel. So what we have to modify in that position location is fully get in convergence of our system to our sim. Okay, know exactly how you communicate through each other through light and dark at the same time. And then you come into your solar sail. And then you see yourself on the sail in that position. Guiding through in that position. Moving forward. Not moving back. If you're moving back, you're going through dark. Overriding light. So you just have to identify this now. And all of us of expanding your system through your configuration of your bodies. So understanding that through light is understanding that. Okay? So when you say light, dark, you're going together through solar sail. If you're saying light and you're separating dark, there's no dark of light, light of dark. Where's the light? Where's the dark? There's no dark, no light. There's no shades, lights, shades, and shadows. So you're chasing your own tail. So you're living in the dark, but you don't identify the light. So you're opposition your system, but you're thinking you're in calculations, not identifying your system. So you're confused your anomaly now. because you live in the dark, not understanding light. Light and dark don't need to understand each other because they're already existing of each other, which is your oversoul. So your light and dark is never in a dream, and that's what you have to get out of. Okay, that's how you guys keep yourself separated from equal in some position of anything. And that's what you got to get in a position of balance. Once you get balance of the equal line center, then you understand what's above and what's below, and how you see what's above. That's above, right? This is below. Okay, in set position. Now you turn this settings in sequence, comes into your pyramid and travel. Okay, comes into your pyramid. There's your pyramid, right? Okay, this is the equilibrium. Okay, so you got the grounds, and you got the two panels that set lines of travel. Okay, which is your pillars of light. Then you got the cross lines and position location center operation line condition setting, which is your primer. And then you work with your two buildings, surface location, your properties, and set lines of travel. Then you get earth line condition your ceiling, or rotation lines of ground communication lines of travel. Okay, and then you get basically you can turn information lines of grounds on sequence on communication setting, travels point lines of graph into face recognition. Okay, there's the face. Boom. Through light and dark. Now add light lines of dark, dark lines of light. Process lines of balance, communication lines expanding the clocking system of time frame. That process indicates sending to my simulator. Inside rotation. Travel points graph, inside line condition setting. Changing my information setting just into the void. Just black lines of spaces, lines of set location. Directing ground centers, online center, line communication setting, process line connection conversion system, alpha line center in the void. Crossing over and position lines of time line. Set lines of travel and polarities of rotation setting of surface and travel. Directing ground centers, online settings, all through pi, process line, indicate lines, course centers, 3-line communication conversion system, location, and calculation. Okay, 3 versions of me in living in dark. So what you guys have to start to indicate is how you see light and how you see dark. How it indicates through you, not nobody else. And you have to see light and dark of no story of any design, because it overrides you already existing through light and dark, which is the balance of everything. So when you get balanced with everything, you're not in light and dark. There is no light and there is no dark until you bring it in. If you don't bring it in, you're just observing everything in the case of what you're looking at. You're looking at the beauty of nature. You're looking at the beauty of how you see the holographic sin and the matrix at the same time. So when you're seeing that and you're identifying that, you're going through light and dark, lights, shades, and shadows through coloration lines that put you in light metaphors and set position lines of balance, which is pattern recognition, face recognition, force recognition, and configuration. Okay? This is going to help you to understand what you're doing in position. That's how to keep yourself balanced through conversations, through telepathy. All right? Anything you say negative overrides the lines of position of the positive. If you live in the negative and you understand the positive, you're not understanding you're already existing of the negative, the positive, positive, and negative. So the positive overrides the negative overrides the negative, or the negative overrides the positive. It doesn't matter, because they're always in position of a constant continuous flow of percentage 100% of the time of yin and yang. Balance of everything. So it doesn't matter, because you're always seeing affinity 8. If you're not seeing affinity 8, you're just seeing a question. And understanding the question, there's nothing to question because you're already there through affinity 8. So now you're traveling through light and dark at the same time. Okay? Balance with your telepathies, balance with your telekinesis, balance with your intent influence, and your mind alteration system, how you communicate to each other through light and through dark, through the ally of you and through the nemesis of you, a balance. Okay? So hope that gets you guys to identify your systems, how you got to come in position lines ascending, how you see your light and how you see your dark through dimensional solar sail travel. Okay? That's all it is in that positions. So there's so many things that you can do, right? Understanding the system of what you're going through, the polarities, is a constant continuous flow of a figure 8 motion, that set line connection system that puts you in a process communication setting all through existing already in information lines, just expanding the system through infinity 8 rotation lines that calculates to its position of its polarities. That's all it is in that position. Okay? All right. Wow, look at that. We got 47 line settings and set lines of sequence. That's amazing. Over 10 lines of pi. This is fantastic stuff. Absolutely incredible. Actually amazing. So I'm having so much fun with you guys. Why? Because I see you through light and dark at the same time. You guys see yourself light and separation of dark at the same time. And that's what you have to come into as a platform, and how to see yourself travels or recognitions of platform communications of balance. Okay? So it's incredible when we come into that positions, right? How we see that. And all of it is void. Just live in the dark itself. Okay? Just the dark itself. Okay? Or you can just live the light. But light doesn't indicate dark. Dark doesn't indicate light because it's its own operation of its own system that's done everything through its eternity. That's right, guys. Your sun and your moon has already been through its process. Everything around you of its consciousness has already been through its eternity of its process. There's nothing for you to do. All you do is nothing, process everything in the position of. That process, your set position location, is setting tight, not doing anything in carpe diem, season the day, and watching everything unfold itself in the rewind. Now, when you do the rewind, it puts you back in position location. It gets you out of the line conditions of its negative and set position of anything negative over positive. Brings you in position positive over negative. There's the balance. Face recognition timeline, setting sequence, 3 lines of grounds, equal lines, core centers of face recognition. Boom. There's the face. Now you come into configuration setting, all through travel, all through the location setting, process communication lines, pattern recognition, face recognition, core centers, configuration setting, and travel. There's the full body. So it's incredible how we come into that line settings, guys. This helps you to defy your system, how you come into that lines of 6, 7, 8, line condition 9, 10, 11, and 12. There's a pyramid. Okay, climbing up the ladder. Okay, going down the ladder. Okay, it doesn't matter, but you're going through set positions, all through tractions of balance. How you see the set lines of communication setting, process your system, how you calculate and modify your line condition setting, how you see yourself through light, dark at the same time. Okay? And how you identify these things, this operator set locations, how you see infinity of all time, all measure, all scale. And in that position to its own line, coming into the flower record of time, lotus line communication to its atom and rotation lines of setting. Propelling its engine location setting to its platforms, fly rigs and time frame into a line position of flywheel. Directing ground centers, create the platform set line core centers, create the platform downline shift lines anomaly, which is your positive, which is your negative. Positive or negative, right? There's your battery in position of positive, there's your locations. So what you have to stand through indication system is all lines of travel. Processing that position location system, you have to understand why there is a positive of the body and why there's a negative of the body. Okay, so it's like this. Okay, this is the positive, this is the negative, and all you're doing is bringing it together in set position. That's all you're doing. And when you bring it together, you see it as a mirage. You get out of the delusion, you get into the illusion, you get into the known, to the unknown, to the phenomenon. Now you're seeing what's below, and now you're seeing what's above is all together in set position, its operation system. Now you're seeing yourself in the simulation setting, all through aligned position of real time. The simulation. So when you merge both together, the polarities come together. So you start living a holographic sim and the matrix sim at the same time. And that's you living in a simulator. Okay? So what you're doing is you're putting 4 centers of 4 pyramids together. 4 pyramids together. Grounding lines of 1, grounding lines of 2, grounding lines of 3, and grounding lines of 4. There's the simulation. Okay? So there's the equal. Okay? The ground shift lines anomaly. Okay? So I don't want you guys to get confused now. The ground is the negative. Okay? The positive, okay, is the ceiling. And the panels is the equal, which is east and west. The north is all also north until you indicate lines of east, west, and south, right? That's your news, that's your current line communication, how you see that. North, east, west, and south. That's where it starts in directions. Now, directing line signals, you can change formation setting and ground lines to set position at wobbles, change the parallels. Trains track location setting, convergent system, all through travel, the location lines of simulation grounds, communication position of degrees. North line settings, compass over lines of track centers, compass core centers, directing lines of north line over lines of south line rotation, setting travel point lines of east line, west line, rotation line, condition setting, position line, operation line, set lines of sequence. Process communication line, condition setting, face recognition. Booyah. So that's how you indicate position of the grounds. The ground is the negatives of everything. The positive is the above. What's above, what's below. So the above line, okay, is the 144 flux. Okay, but there's an equal line, which is a below line, which is also 144 flux. but it's the opposite, which is position of the polarities of the positive. So what you have to understand, that position location and settings, how this line system communicates the setting, you have to understand how this works now. So the triangulation, okay, is the positive, okay? But the line centers, the balance of the indication of its travels in direct lines in a battery over positive or negative, the negative is not a triangulation. The negative is a box. It's the opposite of the triangulation. Okay? You want to modify that, you have to turn it into a triangulation through specifications. Or you're never going to understand yourself through yin and yang, a positive location setting, your polarities. Okay? So as you're looking, I know it's amazing stuff, I'll tell you. So triangulation, okay, is the positive. The negative is the box. Okay? So once the triangle and the box know each other, the box goes inside and it's that position, triangulation box. Now you live in the flux of 3 lines of foundations, which is mother, and you live in 4 lines of communications, which is father. You live in the line position of its female polarity, in position of its male polarity. Now you're in position, there's your flux capacitor and travel communication. Booyah! Now you understand what positive and negative is, their triangulation box. Turns in position, check this out. Light bulb! Woo! There's the intelligence, all information and all levels existing all at once. Okay? And face recognition. The triangulation box. Okay? Now you actually mind blow your system right there. Now you have to understand why everything is positive, its shape. You have to be specific if you want to change that. So you can have a triangulation box like that. Right? So that's 3 centers. Right there. That's 3. But you got 4 lines of setting here, which is 4 setting sequence, right? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? So that process line position location, equal lines, set lines of sequence of flux equals 34. Right? 34. Right? So you got docking station 1, docking station 2, docking station 3, docking station 4, and hangar 5. 4 settings equals lines of 5. 5 lines of settings over lines of sequence. Set position location embedding. Process lines that indicates the setting of flux. Indicate line connection setting and travel with position location of its void. Process indicate line connection setting to convert the system to a pyramid activation line, astral projection, astral travels. There's your pyramid rotation. Booyah. Okay? So now you understand what triangulation box is. It's the opposite of everything, all right? So yes is the positive. No is the negative. So, woo! Okay? It's amazing how we understand that through indications, right? It's actually incredible when you see the positive and the negative to 2 batteries. There's the percentage in set lines of travel. Okay? That's all it is to a battery. How you see the battery in set position, its operation, and its traction location to a system through its negative to its positive. Okay? 2 batteries together sets the charge into a flux of communication setting in lines of extreme adaptation to a light bulb, face recognition. Okay? So, very powerful class. Thanks for coming and that position lines attractions. We'll continue on a force direction timeline and set lines of sequence in Coliseum. Course 10 is the calculation degree location setting in position lines of Dorickson and lines of 1 over lines of crossover 2. Crossover 2. See you in 5.